I'm Dwayne Brown. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, talks are underway in Geneva searching for a diplomatic solution to the chemical weapons crisis in Syria. San Diego's interim mayor goes before news cameras to outline what's getting done in the post-Filner era.
I'm Peggy Pico. SDG&E and California Edison still want a profit and say customers should pay for San Onofre nuclear power plant's breakdown. The California Public Utilities Commission talks with us about those requests. Then, local and state water officials are in San Diego to talk with us about the revised Bay Delta water plan and how it could impact San Diego's water supply.
And a gourmet favorite is causing some worries about our ocean environment. KPBS Evening Edition starts now. Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. Talks to try to get Syria to give up its chemical weapons have begun, but the threat of U.S. military action is still on the table. Tracy Brown with the Associated Press has this update.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry lands in Geneva with one big question in mind. Will a Russian plan to have Syria hand over their chemical weapons actually work?
It has to be verifiable. It has to be credible. It has to be timely and implemented in a timely fashion. And finally, there ought to be consequences if it doesn't take place.
The talks offer a path to avoid U.S. strikes for a chemical attack on Syrian civilians last month that the U.S. blames on President Bashar Assad. Experts say disarmament is difficult but not impossible.
Getting inspectors into the country, securing these materials and then eliminating them is a daunting task with a dozen nightmare logistical problems. But still, it is far easier than the alternatives, doing nothing or going to war.
The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons has no track record in terms of sending inspectors into zones where they might get shot at.
In an interview Thursday, Assad says he agreed to surrender chemical weapons because of Russia's initiative and not because of attack threats. And he says Syria will start submitting chemical weapons data a month after signing a convention banning such weapons.
I think the Syrian government needs to understand that hindering, obfuscating, delaying, shooting at, all those things we've already seen in terms of Ban Ki-moon's first team going into Damascus doesn't work from this point forward.
But removing the chemical weapons doesn't address the myriad of other issues in Syria.
If you can get these kinds of negotiations going for no-fire zones around the facilities and safety for the inspectors, that could be the beginning of exactly the kind of negotiations you need to put a more permanent, broad ceasefire in place.
For now, all eyes are on Geneva. Tracy Brown, Associated Press.
Here in San Diego, the interim mayor, Todd Gloria, gave his first briefing to the press today. He's only been in office a few weeks, but he's already making swift changes to the way things are done. KPBS reporter Claire Trageser was at the briefing. She joins us from the news center. Claire, I understand Gloria had a long list of changes and updates to city policies.
Yes, he did. And Gloria really took every possible opportunity to paint former Mayor Bob Filner's administration as incompetent. He said repeatedly that Filner left him with multiple messes to clean up. For example, Gloria said Filner had not supplied fuel tanks for the new trams in Balboa Park, so the trams won't be able to run until October. He said Filner had fired the city's lobbyists, quote, for no reason, leaving the city's interests unrepresented in Sacramento and Washington, D.C. And he said Filner hadn't allotted enough money to keep the city's homeless shelters open year-round.
It's extremely unfortunate that Mr. Filner allotted insufficient funds to keep our shelters open year-round as he had promised. The lack of adequate funding for homeless programs is another example of a mess that was left by the previous administration that I must now clean up.
And of course, that was one of Filner's big promises, to leave the shelters open year-round. So what happens now?
Gloria says the shelters may have to close in April unless he can find other funding. He says he'll be touring them in the next few days to work on a plan.
And any other big changes coming?
Yes, definitely. Another big change is that Gloria has restarted enforcement of the city's medical marijuana restrictions. He said Filner halted that enforcement because he didn't always follow the rules.
Obviously, the mayor had ceased enforcement and has not been providing the cases that code compliance would generate to the city attorney's office for prosecution.
Gloria says he'll keep holding these weekly media briefings while he's in the mayor's office. That could be until February, depending on what happens in the special election to replace Filner.
And of course, voters go to the polls November 19th. KPBS reporter Claire Trageser. Looks like violent crime was down in San Diego County during the first half of the year, but there were more property crimes such as car theft and burglary. A new report out from the San Diego Association of Governments shows the violent crime rate is at its lowest point in a decade. It was a little lower in 2011. Property crime went up 4% from last year. Researchers say most of these are crimes of opportunity. They say folks have to be aware of suspicious activity and take steps to avoid being a target. Enrollment is going up at California's community colleges. They have more money because voters approved a tax measure last year. You may recall Prop 30. Officials say more money means more courses, and more courses mean more students, 60,000 more this year. SDG&E and Edison are asking for customers to pay billions to cover costs of the failed San Onofre nuclear plant, but ratepayer advocates have a very different opinion. Peggy Pico has more on that debate.
The California Public Utilities Commission will decide if SDG&E and Southern California Edison's combined request for more than $3 billion from customers to recover investment costs in the defunct nuclear power plant are valid. Joining me on the phone with more on what this means to ratepayers is Truman Burns with the Ratepayer Advocate Division of the CPUC. I want to start by saying both Edison and SDG&E declined our request to join this interview. Truman, what are the utility companies asking customers to pay for?
The utilities, Southern California Edison and San Diego Gas and Electric, are asking ratepayers to pay for their sunk or net investment in San Onofre 2 and 3 and for all of their investment in the failed replacement steam generator project.
What is the Division of Ratepayer Advocates recommending?
Our position is that the utilities should not get any further money for the replacement or the failed replacement steam generator project, and that they can recover their net plant or their net investment over a shorter time period at a reduced profit margin and really only 75% of it.
Both companies seem to want to continue to make profits from the defunct plant. Who actually assumes the financial risk when public utilities are privately owned?
The shareholders should.
Why doesn't the company and its stockholders take the hit for a bad company decision?
Well, that's their request to the commission. They don't want to take a hit. They have already announced back in June that they'd taken a several $100 million charge to their earnings. So for accounting purposes, they've already acknowledged this.
If the CPUC grants these financial recovery requests, how would customers pay for it, and how much would our rates go up?
Your customers are already paying for it in their electric rates now. They would continue on. I think the utilities have proposed a slight rate decrease from what current rates are, but what it really means is you would end up paying off the plants now in the next 5 years, as opposed to through 2022 when the NRC licenses would normally expire. You also would have been getting electricity over that time period.
What about the argument that we'd be robbing Peter to pay Paul if we siphon off money from the decommissioning fund?
We are somewhat skeptical of the notion of taking money out of the decommissioning trust funds. That money was set aside specifically to deal with decommissioning the plants when they're done. So we don't think that's necessarily a good idea.
When will the CPUC decide who should pay for the breakdown at San Onofre?
The commission has said they expect a decision in February of 2014.
Truman Burns with the CPUC's Division of Ratepayer Advocates, thank you.
Thank you.
The California Public Utilities Commission will hold 2 public participation hearings on the phase of this investigation in the afternoon and evening of Tuesday, October 1st at the Al Bar Shriners Building in Kearney Mesa. For more information, go to kpbs.org.
Well, the State Coastal Commission will consider a long-awaited proposal next month to expand the San Diego Convention Center downtown by 225,000 square feet. Now, supporters of the project showed off some new images of what it would look like. Organizers say the project opens up new views of San Diego Bay, reroutes truck traffic away from pedestrian areas, and actually meets the needs of large events such as Comic-Con, all under one roof. But one of the coolest features may be the public park and its stunning views of the city.
So this is going to be an opportunity for people to bring their families down and enjoy the bay from, 50 feet in the air and see the entire bay, something they wouldn't be able to do unless they were buying a $200 hotel room, and it's going to be open for everybody to enjoy.
Supporters say the expansion would create nearly 7,000 new jobs and generate more than $13 million in new tax revenue for the city. Coastal Commission will consider the proposal during its meeting October 9th through the 11th. Another sign tonight of a recovering housing market. Southern California home prices went up last month 25% over last year. Sales also went up. The research firm DataQuick says it was the strongest August for home sales in 7 years. Legoland in Carlsbad will open a new water park next summer. The Legends of SEMA is based on one of Lego's product lines. It will be included with admission to a water park already at Legoland. California lawmakers have voted to raise the minimum wage up to $10 an hour within 3 years. It's one of many bills being debated tonight as the legislative session wraps up. They've already rejected a ban on ammunition clips holding more than 10 rounds, and they've stalled a bill to strip the Boy Scouts of their tax-exempt status, but they've passed measures to deal with teacher misconduct and sex offenders who cut off their GPS trackers. Lawmakers also passed new rules for fracking, or taking oil from the ground. They voted to name a section of the San Francisco Bay Bridge after former Assembly Speaker Willie Brown. Now, those bills are all going to the governor. Pacific oysters are a longtime favorite of discriminating diners here in Southern California. They're simple for oyster farmers to cultivate, but they're not native to local waters. As KPBS Business and Environment reporter Eric Anderson tells us, there are some worries about the shellfish's potential impact.
Pacific oysters have nearly a quarter-century history in San Diego County. The Epicurean treat is raised here, and biologist Dennis Peterson knows all about the mollusks.
It's a very robust oyster, grows fast and grows well, and it tastes really good.
Peterson helps run Southern California's only aqua farm. The operation has grown shellfish in a Carlsbad lagoon since 1990.
Underneath these rafts are oyster, mussel, clam. The clam and the oysters are in trays that, like we've seen, the mussels are in the big tubes hanging beneath the rafts.
Peterson says, like any crop, oysters start off with seed stock, small larvae. They grow quickly in an upwelling tank that's constantly moving water over the shells.
Once they're of size, they're transferred to these trays and put out in the lagoon in stacks in these trays. At that point, they're brought in every 3 weeks and tumbled to keep them separate and to help them grow in a cupped shape.
Keeping them separated is important because oysters will glue themselves to hard surfaces.
They tend to form clusters on rocks set on top of each other, and will form, over a period of time, oyster reefs.
And that reef-building ability has the attention of biologist Jeff Crooks. He says the non-native Pacific oyster, likely spread by water carried in ship ballast tanks, is gaining a foothold along the Southern California coast.
This is one of the biggest, most conspicuous things around now, but it didn't used to be here when I first started out. It's only the last 10 years or so that these things have started to appear.
They are easy to find, especially at low tide. Crooks stands on the riprap in Tuna Harbor, adjacent to downtown San Diego.
So what we're looking at is a cluster of shellfish right here growing on this rock. The biggest one is probably 8-9 inches. They can even get much bigger than this.
Their ability to grow makes them valuable commercially, and it helps when they're competing for space in a new habitat. In fact, Crooks says the mollusks are ecosystem engineers. They fundamentally modify the area they live in.
Oysters, unlike most other things, are able to change systems. So they can form big reefs, they get very dense, they can help clear the water, they provide structure, and they provide habitat for other animals, perhaps, but at the same time they can take up space. Native species might be impacted.
That might not be a huge deal here, where there is very little natural habitat, but consider the South Bay. Pacific oysters could take over tidal mudflats that currently support a wide variety of life.
When they start growing in softer, sandy areas and attached to smaller rocks or other clams, then you really get the transformation. You get a transformation from a mud flat, a tide flat, to an oyster bed. And those are very different sorts of habitats that support different species.
Researcher Daniela Zaccarel says that's a valid concern. The UC Fullerton biologist has successfully reintroduced native Olympia oysters at a couple of Southern California locations. They were nearly fished and polluted out of existence. She's considered a local restoration effort, but she concedes the Pacific oysters might outcompete the smaller, slower-growing natives. Even so, she says, it would be interesting to see a key habitat type return to the region.
Imagine a whole habitat type completely disappeared, like all the kelp forests, and what an enormous impact that would have on community diversity or on habitat structure. So one has to wonder how different Southern California estuaries are now than they might have been 100 years ago when oyster beds were present.
Zaccarel says the quandary is predicting the impact Pacific oysters will have. If that impact turns out to be bad, there might not be much that can be done. She says removing a fast-growing invasive species that's already established itself may not be possible. Eric Anderson, KPBS News.
State officials are in San Diego to talk about the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. Peggy Pico's looking into the economic benefits and why county water officials are asking so many questions.
State water officials say their recent economic report on the proposed twin tunnel project to carry water from the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta to Central and Southern California would generate billions of dollars for the state. But critics say the report exaggerates the benefits and underestimates environmental impact. Here with the latest on the Bay Delta Conservation Plan are Jerry Merrill with the California Natural Resource Agency and Dennis Cushman, Assistant General Manager of the San Diego County Water Authority. Welcome.
Thank you.
Jerry, the idea of this project is to restore the Delta's ecology, I understand, and provide a reliable water supply. How does this project propose to accomplish this?
Well, first there would be, as you mentioned, a potential tunnel project that would carry water from the Sacramento River to the state and federal water pumps. This is in the Delta region up near the city of Sacramento. And that would be part of the project to firm up the water supply. Also, there's an ecological restoration program to bring back wetlands, tidal areas, and so on to restore the fisheries and other biology of the Delta.
And we're talking about 30 miles of these twin tunnels?
That's right.
Okay. Dennis, I understand the Delta provides 30% of Southern California's water and about 20% here in San Diego. But we've done a lot here to diversify our water sources, including, the Carlsbad desal plant, I think the San Vicente Reservoir. Do we really need a project like this here in San Diego?
Well, yes, we have diversified our water supplies and are continuing to do that, so we're becoming less reliant on water from the Bay Delta, but the Bay Delta is still an important part of our overall water supply. So even with this great diversification, we still need reliable imported water, both from Northern California, the Bay Delta, and also the Colorado River, so it's still really important for San Diego.
And Jerry, I'm going to talk about what the critics are saying about this. They say the tunnels would devastate maybe Delta agriculture, recreation, fisheries, as you were talking about restoring those, and that the state has exaggerated the reliability benefits. What kind of studies have been done to kind of counter these accusations or to address them?
Well, we know that the current situation in the Delta is bad. The water reliability is going downhill, and also the biology of the Delta, the fish, are going downhill. So we've got to do something. We think that the plan we're proposing responds to climate change, which is a big element in affecting our water supply, and also will restore the fisheries and avoid negative impacts on Delta residents.
Well, at this point, I know, Dennis, that the County Water Authority has not endorsed the plan yet. You have some questions. What are some of the concerns?
Well, a lot of the questions, concerns we have are around financing. Who's really going to step up and pay for the project among all the water agencies that have been involved in the planning? And how much is Metropolitan Water District, our wholesale supplier of Bay Delta water, going to commit to? And how is that going to translate to water rates right here in San Diego County? So we've been asking Dr. Merrill and others in the BDCP for answers around who's really going to step up to the plate, commit to pay for it, and what's it going to cost us.
If it went through, how much would San Diegans be paying?
Well, we don't know that right now, so we haven't seen any analysis of what the ratepayer impact will be. But we have heard figures that it could add $200 to the acre foot of water we buy from Metropolitan, perhaps if Met takes on more costs, up to $400 an acre foot. Well, that would raise rates from Metropolitan to us here in San Diego between 30% and 66%. So that's a big water rate increase for us here in San Diego. On top of the past 10 years, water rates have already doubled for Metropolitan, so it's a big concern.
We're looking at video of the Delta right now, and Jerry, I want to say, this is, I understand, a $25 billion projected cost for this project. Who would pay for it? Who would fund this overall?
The tunnel part of the project would be paid for by the water users, so people in San Diego, people in Fresno, people in Santa Clara Valley, all these many water users throughout the state. 25 million people use water from the Delta. The ecological restoration part would be paid for by the general public through bonds or through federal appropriations. That seemed like a fair balance.
So several sources. What are the next steps on moving forward with
We
this?
have to issue the draft report and the environmental impact statement this fall, and then people will be able to comment on that, tell us what they think, and we'll refine the project based on the comments, and we hope to finish the process next year.
Well, there's a whole lot more on our website, kpbs.org, about this. Jerry Merrill and Dennis Cushman, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy.
I'm Gwen Eiffel. On the next News Hour, Jeffrey Brown teams up with poet laureate Natasha Trethway for a story on how poetry can help people with Alzheimer's disease. That's Thursday on the PBS News Hour.
Four Balboa Park museums are getting nearly $500,000 in federal money for new projects. The Model Railroad Museum will build a new exhibit as part of the park's centennial celebration coming up. The Museum of Photographic Arts will start a new learning program for teens and young adults. And the San Diego Society of Natural History will use technology to connect folks with nature. And the Natural History Museum will create new interactive maps for smartphones in the web. The money comes from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. If you haven't checked this out, Cinema Under the Stars is celebrating 20 years of outdoor movies in Mission Hills. KPBS arts reporter Beth Accomando takes us on a visit to this cozy alternate movie venue where you can watch classic movies every week through November.
Hollywood celebrities greet you at the door. There's even a red carpet to walk as you enter. Programmer Ralph DeLauro says, in a word, Cinema Under the Stars is
magic. We try and create an environment and an atmosphere where people feel comfortable and leave positively stimulated and wonder why they hadn't come before.
Cinema Under the Stars is a charming outdoor venue with a 20-foot screen, digital projection, THX sound, and 60 cozy seats. Doug Yeagley opened the theater 20 years ago next to his Tops hair salon.
I think charming is it. I think enchanted, those are kind of words that kind of work. You know, the twinkle lights, the orbs, there's something a little magical feeling to it.
I am standing in mission control. This is where all the dastardly deeds get done. We try and assault all the senses. I love the sound of the water flowing and the lights on and off. So I would hope you'd get a sense of romance, a sense of adventure, a sense of fun, a sense of a lot of hard work and effort put into your comfort, a sense of people trying to create a community.
So it's like a cinema church. You all get along, you all sing together, and all of a sudden for 2 hours everybody likes everybody.
And they hope film buffs, once converted, will be singing the praises of Cinema Under the Stars. Coming up are Notorious and Roman Holiday, featuring the Holy Trinity of classic cinema: Cary Grant, Alfred Hitchcock, and Audrey Hepburn. Beth Accomando, KPBS News.
Well, from Cinema Under the Stars to a warmer weekend ahead. Saturday will be the hottest day along the coast with temperatures in the mid-80s, same pattern for the inland valleys, 95 on Saturday. Then a bit cooler on Sunday, but mountain temperatures will keep warming up through the weekend, mid-80s there. The desert will also see rising temperatures above 100. Let's recap some of tonight's top stories. A rough first day of talks in Geneva about a Russian proposal that let Syria turn over its chemical weapons. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad promises to offer an inventory of the weapons without giving up immediately. Secretary of State John Kerry says that's not good enough, and a U.S. strike is still possible. In San Diego, interim mayor Todd Gloria held his first media briefing and announced several changes in city plans and policies. One big change: the city's zoning laws for medical marijuana clinics will be enforced. Former Mayor Bob Filner had stopped enforcement. Gloria says he also found a lot of messes in the mayor's office, including a funding problem for homeless shelters.
It's extremely unfortunate that Mr. Filner allotted insufficient funds to keep our shelters open year-round as he had promised. The lack of adequate funding for homeless programs is another example of a mess that was left by the previous administration that I must now clean up. I'm working with the city staff.
And Gloria says the shelters may have to close in April unless he can find other funding. He says he'll tour them in the next few days to work out a plan. You can find tonight's stories and download the KPBS app all on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Good night.